All that and more on First Coast Connect's Week in Review. Then we sit down with acclaimed jazz harpist Brandy Younger ahead of her WJCT soundstage appearance on March 14th. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or send an email to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also watch our program live stream now on Facebook and the WJCT YouTube page. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Michelle Coram. Aldi has completed its acquisition of Jacksonville-based Southeastern Grocers, the parent company of Harvey's and Winn-Dixie. The purchase is part of a plan to add 800 new Aldi stores nationwide by 2028. According to Aldi, about 50 Winn-Dixie and Harvey's stores will be converted into Aldi's. To make that happen, it's not known which ones in our area will be converted. Governor Ron DeSantis and the Florida legislature are on the verge of boosting and stabilizing the state's funding of epilepsy services. Margie Menzel reports.
The money is in the budget, and Steve Shale says it can help hundreds of thousands of Floridians, their families, and their caregivers. Shale is a political strategist with decades of experience. He also had epilepsy as a child and has used his political connections to improve the care available to Floridians with the disorder.
But over that time, we've not often had people who were in the legislature who had seizures. And so for me, it's been a way that I can kind of testify to my own personal experience and provide voice for those people who don't have the access that I'm blessed to have in this process to tell the story. And fortunately, year after year, we found legislators who understand what we're dealing with, or we find members who have sisters or brothers or cousins. And this win this year is a really big deal for us going forward.
Shale points to Representative Jenna Persons-Mulica, whose stepson has epilepsy, and to Senator Ileana Garcia, who, like Shale, had the disorder as a child. Persons-Mulica sponsored the budget item in the House and Garcia in the Senate. I'm Margie Menzel.
And it's cloudy and 69 degrees here downtown in Jacksonville. Temperatures will get to the upper 70s this afternoon, upper 60s overnight, 40% chance of rain Saturday afternoon.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Opinions expressed on the First Coast Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not necessarily reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time to take a look at the week's biggest headlines with our First Coast Week in Review panel. This week, the sheriff issues a very public clapback after false accusations of police misconduct. A woman accused of killing her ex wants the high-profile case and the entire prosecution team to be dismissed. A former funeral home owner accused of mishandling human remains faces additional felony charges. And the legislature approves a local lawmaker's bill banning public camping. To talk about all that and more, I'm joined by Claire Goforth, investigative reporter at the Daily Dot.
Good morning.
Good morning. Ann Maxwell, investigative reporter at our news partner, News4Jax. Hey, Ann.
Hey, Ann.
And Katie Jeffries, morning anchor and reporter at First Coast News. Hi.
Hi, Ann. Glad to be here.
I am glad to have you. To our listeners, you can join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email comments or questions to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also watch the live stream of today's program on First Coast Connect Facebook and YouTube pages. Let's start with some news about Jacksonville Sheriff T.K. Waters. He has made transparency a watchword of his administration, and we've learned that can take many forms. Earlier this week, it consisted of a lengthy press conference, some of it carried live by local TV stations, in which he basically debunked a woman's claim of police mistreatment. I want to dig into the strategy of this approach in just a minute, but Claire, remind us what led up to this point.
So Imogene King says that on December 3rd, she was involved in a single car crash. When officers responded to the scene, she claims that rather than render aid to her, she was bleeding profusely from a leg wound. Their main priority was giving her a breathalyzer test and accusing her of being under the influence, which she says that she passed. She claims they delayed care, ultimately she would spend 17 days in the hospital, and she says that her injuries were severe enough that they did say they may amputate her leg. She did thankfully keep her leg. She claims that the officers they were out of line. They violated policy by delaying care and pushing a DUI investigation on her. They kept her mother from going to her when she was there in the car. But ultimately, according to Sheriff Waters and the footage that was released, it does show that the officers were there. She was getting care from JFRD. Reverend Gundy has taken up her cause, and
what precipitated this was she kind of held a press conference on the steps of the
yes,
headquarters. So tell us about that a little bit.
Correct. She held a press conference in which she made the accusations that officers had that they were out of line, that they violated policy, and really, threw the gauntlet down. And so
a very emotional statement.
A very emotional statement. And, to be fair to her, she was in a serious car accident. She says that she lost consciousness. She woke up. Officers were yelling at her. She's bleeding. She's in pain. She doesn't really know. I mean, imagine, put yourself in that situation. It's going to be very disorienting, and you may not get all of the details correct. But according to the sheriff and the body cam footage, there was no misconduct. They did an internal affairs investigation and found there was nothing improper about how officers handled the matter. Mm-hmm. But, and Sheriff Waters' strategy in this obviously is to create the perception of transparency and that their officers are doing right, and when they're not doing right, they're being held accountable. But here's the thing, that we all know that this is going on, in the midst of years and years and years of complaints. In recent months, I just did a very quick search this morning about cases where JSO officers have been accused of misconduct, and just multiple headlines pop up. A video shows that a Jacksonville sheriff's officer slapped a 29-year-old man during a traffic stop, which was under review. A Jacksonville sheriff would say that a viral video showing use of force in another instance was intentionally altered, but that was investigated. The sheriff at that point said there was force used, and force is ugly. Just because it's ugly doesn't mean it's unlawful. There was a JSO officer demonstrated conduct unbecoming during traffic stop of black veteran, internal investigation finds. So this is just a sampling of things that we hear again and again over the years. And that is part of the reason why cases like Imogene King's, they resonate with the community, whether or not each individual instance is a case of police misconduct doesn't take away from the overall perception the community has that there are issues with JSO that need to be ferreted out.
Right. And TK walked through each of the claims that the woman had made. He said the body cam, quote, affirmatively disproved each claim. Let's hear a little from first Miss King making her complaint and then the sheriff's response.
They wouldn't let me get into the ambulance, and the EMTs was trying to tell them that I needed to go because I could bleed out of how much blood was on me. They said that they had to do a breathalyzer test on me before I could get into the ambulance.
Upon full review of the body-worn camera footage, you'll see that no JSO officer requested or completed a breath test of the complainant. While this agency will always support citizens' right to free speech and free assembly, we will also speak out against such free speech when it's categorically false and aimed at fostering public distrust in the police.
Katie, did TK score some points with the public here? Did he score some points with other officers? Who do you think is his main audience?
I think his audience, of course, is trying to kind of push back against the narrative that was put out by King. And he did make a strong case by, I think, walking through it piece by piece. They did release the full unedited version of each body camera on the transparency page. So if people want to go watch it, the full versions, they can, because the versions he showed were kind of edited down. It was a long press conference, but it was pieces were edited down to show each specific claim. But it definitely did address the claims that were made. And I do think he maybe scored some points with the public for what he was trying to show, that the narrative against his officers that they acted out of line, that at least it didn't occur. I think he did push back pretty hard against it.
And Anne, body cam is being used increasingly by officers as a defense, and it's not the first time the sheriff has done this. In the case of Lakean Woods, there had been these very viral, graphic mugshots that had raised a lot of questions about police conduct, and he very quickly, once again, put together the body cam footage to show what led up to that and what he said was defensible use of force by his officers. How have police come around to the idea of body cam? I mean, initially, police unions really were opposed to body cams, and it seems more and more that at least in some cases, that the body cam is being used to exonerate officers.
Yeah, I think, Claire, you had mentioned that, the sheriff was saying just because, something might not rise to the level of misconduct, maybe it might appear unsavory to a civilian, somebody who's just watching this, but it might not rise to the level of something that officially would get them in trouble. And I think that the body camera is something that, may have highlighted that.
Yeah. And Claire, to your point, I mean, when she had a leg wound that went basically from her hip to her knee and was, inches wide and bone deep. It was not a small injury. And, it wouldn't be surprising if somebody came away from that with scrambled backs. Anybody that's been in a traumatic situation knows that there's a lot of things that seem difficult at the time. And yet, Pastor Gundy took up this issue and really made a claim of police misconduct and using it as a platform to advocate for citizen review boards. The sheriff took the opportunity to say that's a great example of why we shouldn't have review boards, because cases like this, show that the public doesn't have the proper perspective.
I mean, is he assuming that the public isn't capable of reviewing the same unaltered footage and coming to the same conclusion based on the law? I mean, that's really what he's doing, and I know that he supports the legislation that would prohibit civilian review boards, which is co-sponsored by local Representative Dean Black, who I find interesting given that neither Nassau nor Duval County have civilian review boards. In other cases around the country, other places in Florida where they have civilian review boards, I am not aware of any significant issues where they have caused problems with police officers there. In fact, they have been shown to increase trust and also to diminish use of force in arrests, particularly of Black people.
TK accused Pastor R.L. Gundy, Katie, of pushing what he called an anti-police narrative. And in fact, in her words, Imogene King straight up said, we're looking at you. You've got to report. Somebody's going to say something and you can't get away with it. So she was also not raising questions about conduct, but very much saying that this was misconduct.
And like you said, after an accident, when something traumatic happens, her recollection of things are probably different, maybe scrambled. I mean, when you watch the full video, there are some moments where officers raise their voices, usually to tell people to move their vehicles because they were stopped on the highway. So how that can be interpreted when you're in pain or after an accident, I mean, how you interpret those events in a traumatic situation can be different than how they're viewed when you go back and watch the body cam.
Got a call, AJ in Arlington. Good morning, AJ. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. How's everybody? My question is, originally that call was initiated by a Florida Highway Patrol call, and Jacksonville Sheriff's Office was there just to assist with traffic. From what I heard from the interview with Sheriff Waters, could the victim be confused on which officers was hollering at her initially, since JSO was there in the supportive role, not as the lead agency?
So the sheriff did say that, yeah, his officers were basically there to kind of control traffic and keep the perimeter safe as the rescue team came in to collect the victim. And FHP was the primary on that. We haven't reviewed their body cam, and so, what that interaction was like.
I don't think FHP has body cam.
Oh, interesting. Really?
I don't think so.
I'm not sure.
They have dash cam?
Sure
I don't think they do, because I feel like I've asked for it or in other situations, and I don't think they do.
Uh-huh. We've got a message from Ed on Facebook. He says the best thing that has happened is the body cams for police. It protects the public from rogue officers, and it protects the police from erroneous accusations. We also have a call. Dale in Avondale, good morning. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. Good morning to everybody on the panel. I have a statement first. Number one, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office are civil servants. They are servants of the people. They are paid by the taxpayers of Duval County. So they are accountable to those taxpayers, whoever they may be, rich, poor, young, old, black, white, whatever. That's the first thing. Number two, I don't understand why anyone who doesn't have anything to hide would be opposing to having a citizen review board. In most large metropolitan cities, that is an absolute fact, a reality. So, if you don't have anything to hide, and we know that there have been many, many instances in the past where JSO has acted as bad characters to the point of even breaking the law.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand the concept, and I see, that it's almost like just across the board, you have the sheriff's associations that are,
Dale, thanks a lot for your thoughts. I'm going to put it to Claire just in terms of, the Citizens Review Board. You kind of alluded to the fact that Tallahassee is taking the lead on whether or not citizen review boards will even be permitted. Not favored there.
No, it is not. And it is interesting to me that they are once again attacking home rule and looking to prohibit different places around the state from making decisions about what's best for their own communities. Civilian review boards, the data does not hold up to what Sheriff T.K. Waters claims, that it's going to, just be a scourge on police and make everyone hate them. In fact, quite the opposite. It makes it people tend to trust the police more often when civilian review boards back them up, which is what happens most of the time.
Right. All right. Well, we're talking about the week's biggest headlines. You can join our conversation by giving us a call at 904-549-2937 or emailing firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or you can tag us on X at FCC On Air. I want to move on to a story that has been a talker, to say the least. Anne, you've been reporting on this story from the beginning, and just a caution to our listeners, the subject is a little macabre. Remind us of how this investigation into this funeral home began, and what is the owner accused of?
So the owner of this funeral home is accused of abandoning the mortuary. It's called Marion Graham Mortuary on the north side, with bodies decomposing inside. Very disturbing. There are lots of other allegations from families as well I can get into. And so the investigation began when these families were calling state regulators saying, I don't know where my loved one's ashes are. I paid for X, Y, and Z ahead of time for this funeral, and we didn't get those services. And so from reading the warrant, apparently the state investigators, this is with the State Department of Financial Services, which is kind of strange. It might seem that they regulate the funeral industry, but these prepaid funerals are, I learned in this reporting, a form of insurance, and so they regulate insurance. And so they were looking into this, and according to the warrant, were trying to get in touch with Maurice Graham, who was the funeral director of this funeral home after his father passed, who had really built up this business. And so they couldn't find him for weeks, and he kept saying, he's busy or whatever. And so finally investigators were like, look, we're coming January 30th to do an inspection whether you're there or not. So they get inside the building, find this grisly scene of these 3 bodies, they said, infested with bugs in various states of decomposition, not refrigerated. And so they're in there for days, going in and out of the building. And he's charged with improper preservation of human remains, several counts of that, theft, filing false insurance claims. He's on the run for several days, and they finally track him down in Orlando and take him into custody. And he was just recently hit with some additional of those felony financial crimes. So definitely a really disturbing story. And we've heard from a lot more people than there's just a couple charges right now, but we've heard from a lot more people than that have had issues with him that the state's looking into. So this is still an active investigation, last we heard from the state attorney's office.
Claire, this story is just so disturbing for families. And it's not really that unique. There's actually a case in Colorado last year, a funeral home found with 200 decomposed bodies in it. And And then another case out of Colorado just a little before that, where there was a funeral home that they found a woman's body in the back of a hearse and hoarded cremated remains from 30 people. Is there a sense that there needs to be more oversight of this industry, generally speaking, or here in Florida?
I mean, absolutely. Given these cases that that when you lose a loved one, you place such trust in the funeral home, the mortuary, the crematorium, all of these entities to properly and respectfully dispose of the remains according to your wishes or their wishes. And to think of a family learning, like the one man alleged, that his wife was supposed to have been cremated and was actually left to decompose in a building. I mean, just the thought of that is horrifying. And, the what was the entity that?
The Florida Department of Financial Services.
Department of Financial Services. It does feel like that there should be some sort of health department oversight. I don't have a lot of inside knowledge about the funeral industry, but if these things are happening around the country, then yeah, something definitely needs to be done.
Actually, the case prompted the chief financial officer of the state of Florida, Jimmy Petronas, to push for legislation. Let's listen to what he had to say. He was addressing a Senate committee in February.
We had a very unfortunate set of circumstances in Jacksonville where a funeral home was abandoned. We could not access the property because we needed a felony to be able to do this. And then individually, the funeral director there had left, ultimately had turned himself in, but the worst thing I could charge the individual with was a misdemeanor for what had taken place. So we needed to be able to act swiftly. Unfortunately, without having the ability to charge with a felony, we found a workaround because there was considered grand theft. Grand theft gives us felony charges to be able to get the warrants that we needed. But it was unfortunate, and those families shouldn't have had to wait a single minute to be able to have their situation addressed.
Katie, this case seems extreme, but I know at First Coast News, you hear so many complaints about funeral homes, the handling of someone's loved ones' remains, the cemeteries that have fallen into ruin.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Or cemeteries that have fallen into ruin, or people who aren't getting their ashes in a timely manner. Or, I mean, you get horror stories like this. But like Petronas was saying a minute ago, the fact that this was a misdemeanor until you had to find some type of financial workaround is shocking. Like, what happened to these people's family members is horrifying. And it should have been a felony, but you had to find a financial way to make it a felony. It's just so wrong.
Even to access the property,
right.
That they're trying to make that investigation happen and their hands are tied. And is there a sense, I know that Petronas was pushing for a legislative fix of some kind that would allow his agency greater oversight. But today's the last day of the legislature. It looks like maybe that bill has stalled out. And I think that the question that the community will continue to have is, what should be done? I mean, obviously, you've talked to a lot of victims' families. What are they asking for?
At this point, I think a lot of them are concerned about their loved one and what happened with their case. And some of them, one lady I called when I was reporting on this other day was like, let me talk to my attorney and get back to you. So, I mean, it appears people might be preparing to file lawsuits. I think they're, from what I can tell, kind of focused on their own cases right now. And I think that it's happening really quickly with the legislation that's been proposed, inspired by this case. I mean, this has just been in the past few weeks, and we're now in the last week of session. So I'm curious that this is something, if it doesn't pass this session, that will continue to be a conversation because, this case appears to be far from over.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to another big headline, but if you're listening, you're welcome to join our conversation. You can give us a call at 904-549-2937 or send us an email if you have a comment or a question. So another big headline, Katie, and this is one we haven't discussed in a while. So this is the case of a Jacksonville woman accused of murdering her ex-husband in 2022, in February 2022. Jared Bridegan, he was ambushed, shot and killed in front of his 2-year-old daughter in Jacksonville Beach. Now the shooter has since confessed. Is going to be a big witness in this case against Bridegan's ex-wife and her new husband. They're accused of orchestrating this execution. You've been in the weeds on this case from the very beginning, probably more than any other reporter in Jacksonville. What's the latest on this case? What's happening in court this week?
So a lot happened and before the criminal proceedings can move forward, there's a couple issues they're trying to hash through. So first, on Monday, Shanna Gardner, the ex-wife who is facing first-degree murder charges, her attorneys filed to have her indictment dismissed or the state attorney's office removed from the case. They are arguing that essentially when her Apple devices, Google Drives, iClouds, when they were seized back in February of last year, she had already retained legal representation. So when those were taken in for the murder investigation, her attorneys reached out to the prosecutor's office and said, there's attorney-client privileged communication on these devices. We want to make you aware of that because obviously that's privileged. And that the prosecutor's office, the state attorney's office, said that they would create a taint team, kind of like a screening team, to go through, redact out any attorney-client privileged materials before investigators could look at these devices and these informations as a part of the investigation. Well, they are now saying in motions filed to the court that this taint team consisted of one United States Secret Service agent who was not trained for this, did not have any specific protocol to follow, and when he had questions, he would reach out to the state attorney's office and ask them for legal advice as to whether or not something was privileged. So they were saying there's just been improper conduct. They're calling it egregious. They said that basically the prosecution made itself a part of the taint team, and therefore either the state attorney's office should be completely removed from the case or her indictment should be dismissed. Just yesterday, there was a hearing over some attorney-client privilege materials because there are two documents basically in contention where the state attorney's office is saying these are fair game. Defense is saying no, they're privileged. So an independent judge is looking over the unredacted information to essentially decide. That'll go back to the original judge who will make the decision. And further down the line, we'll have hearings on whether or not the state attorney's office can stay on the case.
So are those two separate things, these two documents in question versus the other privileged information that defense attorneys are saying that the prosecutors should not have accessed?
Kind of. So it seems like the two items in question are communications with Mario Fernandez and his attorneys, which would be her second husband and his attorneys. It appears that those two in question are kind of under his umbrella, and they have separate defense teams. But Shanna and Mario's defense teams are united in their motion to remove the state attorney's office because of how they've handled attorney-client privilege throughout this investigation.
Interesting. This, I think, speaks to, Claire, what happens when you get really high-profile attorneys, really well-paid attorneys involved. Shanna Gardner's family obviously is extremely wealthy. They've got a company out in Utah that they've started and, have a fair amount of money. But prosecutors maybe aren't accustomed to quite the level of scrutiny that they're going to get in a case like this. When you have a defense team that is working and charging those kinds of bills, they're going to be really put under the microscope in a way that they may not be prepared for.
That's true. And if what the defense team says is accurate regarding how the taint team operated, then they should certainly do better. They should streamline that process. Attorney-client privilege is a very serious matter. I will say, though, I don't think that it is very likely they'll succeed to have the state attorney's office removed from the case. I do think that's a tactic designed to try to get the case out of this jurisdiction because, in part, there's been so much media attention and there's so much awareness of it. And this is a way to sort of say, a way to try to get it away from Jacksonville without that particular filing that motion, which judges generally do not grant anyway. It's a horrible case, and I know that it's going to be an explosive trial when it does happen. There may be bar complaints in regards to the taint, handling of the attorney-client privilege material. We'll have to see how that goes, but it's pretty de rigueur for a judge to simply exclude evidence from a case.
It's sort of interesting, I think, to lay people that these defendants had retained attorneys so long ago, well before they were being charged. Mm-hmm. But of course, that's not something that would be material at a trial or permissible for a jury to hear. It just sort of is one of those things that I think catches people's attention.
And they knew they were under investigation. So, any smart person should get an attorney in that situation. It doesn't say whether they're guilty or innocent of anything.
Mm-hmm. And there was so much attention at the time on this case as well. And remember when I think when Shanna first retained an attorney, she said it was to protect her children from media scrutiny.
Right. I think that's what her attorney was saying
Right.
publicly. Right. And, when you have a high profile, and the defense attorney in this case is kind of Jose Baez of Casey Anthony fame, somebody that is well recognized in the media. He is going to be pushing back on prosecutors in a way that is different than a lot of high profile cases in this circuit, because most of those are handled by the public defender's office. There's not a lot of homicide cases or death penalty cases that clients can afford to defend. And so most cases, they're declared indigent and they are cases assigned to the public defender's office. You don't see that kind of animus. I mean, you don't see that kind of like attack style approach. The public defender's office is usually very, low key. They don't talk publicly about their cases. And so it will be a very different experience for this prosecution team.
Yeah, Jose Baez is an aggressive attorney. I mean, he's sharp. I was reading through the motion Katie was referencing earlier about, why they want the state attorney's office locally off of this. And my colleague Aaron Farrar chased him down outside of the courthouse one day about why he took the case. And he was like, I believe my client is innocent and the state, wants to have the death penalty on her. And so I'm going to fight for her, and he comes out and says that, and that is, not something we see very often here in Jacksonville.
Yeah, we should say she's also represented by Patrick Crowdy, who's a very competent death attorney here in Jacksonville, and he's going to be handling a lot of those cases in the weeks ahead. Katie, what are you watching for next in this case? Is there any expectation? Is there any thought that maybe one of the defendants would become a state witness and testify against the other? I mean, this is a death penalty case. There's a lot on the line for both of the defendants.
Right. I'm never say never, but I almost feel like we're at the point, if that was going to happen and one was going to flip, it would have happened by now. The next big thing, I think, will be the hearing where the judge will hear arguments about whether or not the state attorney's office stays on the case. So I believe that's when they're going to bring in the United States Secret Service agent who was the taint team, have him testify in front of the judge, as well as any other witnesses about this specific issue. Because until they figure out this issue with privilege and whether or not the state attorney's office is staying on this case, they can't move forward with the rest of the criminal proceedings. So these have to be sorted out first before the rest of the pretrial items can happen. So the next big thing will be sorting out this issue as to whether or not the state attorney's office will stay on the case.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about the week's biggest headlines, and I am joined by Claire Goforth of the Daily Dot and Maxwell of News for Jackson, Katie Jeffries of First Coast News. I want to move on now to a topic that was championed by a local lawmaker about public sleeping and public camping. It was a controversial bill. It was proposed by Sam Garrison, who represents Fleming Island, and just approved by the state legislature. It will ban public sleeping. It's a controversial bill because, Claire, people are homeless without housing, and very often don't have a place to go. Tell us why Sam Garrison is pushing for this, or has successfully pushed through this legislation.
Well, I mean, he says that it's going to be safer for the unhoused population if they have designated sleeping areas and more room in shelters. But the problem is there isn't the room in the shelters. These people have to sleep somewhere. And I wondered, as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, what if I take a nap on the beach? Is that okay? What if I'm having lunch at a park and I just doze off? Is that okay? Or is it going to specifically target people who, quote, look homeless, right? We know the answer to homelessness. It's housing, right? We do know this. But instead of doing that, they're basically trying to criminalize homelessness. And that is why Democrats in the state are pushing back in this, including one from South Florida who formerly was homeless. And when you read things like people who support the bill calling homeless people a nuisance, they want to clean the streets of a nuisance. That nuisance is human beings.
And I'm curious if this is going to face any kind of legal pushback because, they're not supposed to be under this law of sleeping in public property, that the public property is for the public. Are these members of the public? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw potentially some lawsuits from some sort of advocacy groups on this.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about this bill is that it kind of puts, instead of targeting the homeless people, unhoused people, with penalties, they're almost penalizing the city or the municipality that is failing to provide a place. So the idea is that not only would this make illegal sleeping or camping in public, but it would also require that city to create kind of a place where that camping is allowed, whether it's an outdoor space, but it would have to have certain facilities, Anne.
Right. I believe it has to have running water, restrooms, security. I mean, that's expensive. And my understanding is this would open the door for private citizens, businesses to sue a municipality if they aren't providing that. And so, yeah, it really puts the onus on
Yeah,
these
and the
localities.
facilities can only be there for a year, and they can't affect property rights. So
Or values.
Oh, sorry, right. Yeah, you're right. Values, not rights. So like, where are you going to put these places? Basically, just seems like we did just want to hide the unhoused population.
Dawn Gilman is the CEO of Changing Homelessness, and she spoke to that directly. Claire, let's hear about that.
The only way to end a person's homelessness is for them to move into a home. We move people oftentimes literally from the streets into housing. That component is missing, and until it's there, we're just shifting the problem around.
Katie, this bill, though, if unless it's vetoed by Governor DeSantis, it would take effect in October of this year. That's not a lot of time for cities to prepare for what is basically an unfunded mandate.
I was just about to say, with this law that they want passed, where's the funding to make this happen? To set up the running water, the security, the bathrooms, or to help provide money to build more shelters, build more affordable housing, mental and physical health. I mean, there's so many things that I feel like there's so many aspects that go into homelessness. Just shuffling people into one area is not going to solve the problem. And you have to have money to help these local governments end homelessness, to be able to build affordable housing, to be able to provide care for people. So passing a bill is one thing, but where's the funding to help make this happen, to help the people?
I want to move to a couple of calls. Jerry in St. Augustine, good morning. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. Thanks for having my call. I also just wanted to point out that this law would affect people who are traveling through our state. A lot of people do car camping, which is an economical way to get around to see the national sites, and sometimes they park in, say, a Walmart parking lot or Cracker Barrel. And this law would actually affect their ability to move around, the country as they could afford to.
Thanks, Jerry. I believe the bill actually makes an exception for car camping.
I believe that's what I read as well. If you're camping within your vehicle, that's okay.
Yeah, I think that is the case. When it comes to moving people into housing, Claire, it's not like there's a great glut of affordable housing. In fact, even people who are trying to buy mid-priced and fairly expensive homes are having trouble finding them.
Yeah, I mean, look at what has happened to the housing market in the last few years. It's unaffordable for many, and this particular legislation just implies that they're good-for-nothing ne'er-do-wells who are roaming the streets. In fact, many homeless people are employed, and where are they going to live if you're making $15 an hour and the average rent is $1,200 or $1,300? I'm sure you can find cheaper places, but is it close to where you work? Do you have transportation? Does public transportation go there within 30 minutes to an hour? These are all things that are facing this population, and this legislation is basically saying get out of town.
We got a call, Shane from Mandarin. Good morning, Shane. Go ahead. Shane, you there? We're going to move, I guess, to Charlie in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Charlie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. I just wanted to give you a heads up on the current law as far as Jacksonville Beach. No, according to Jacksonville Beach City Ordinance 16-10, sleeping, lodging, and camping is not allowed on the beach at any time. So you can't sleep on the beach in Jacksonville Beach now. You weren't last year. That's against the law.
Thanks, Charlie. Oh, go ahead.
The other thing is, I'm just curious, do you want someone sleeping in your front yard? Or at NPR, do you have a problem with someone, half a dozen people setting up camps and sitting at the front door to enter NPR? I'm guessing that's probably not something you'd be interested in happening. But as far as, I think most people would agree, they really don't want people sleeping in their front yards. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. I appreciate that. I guess the distinction here, Ann, would be between private property and public property.
Right. And I think that there are a lot of people who don't want to see people sleeping on the streets, and it disturbs them. I mean, the bill is passed. I mean, there obviously is support for that in the state, and it's an issue that people care about. But, as we've discussed, the question is, what happens to those people, and how is this enforced and paid for?
Or whether this is a solution. I mean, you think it's everyone is sort of in agreement that tent cities are not a great thing for the people that live in them or the people that live around them. We've got a call, Tom, on the west side. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning to you, too. Just wanted to say first that it seems to me like this is just another attempt to hide the homeless, and that's a bad thing. But in addition to that, if they're not providing full services like we were attempting to do in the Jefferson Street homeless camp, which the city shut down, then it's an even worse idea. And also, there's one other huge problem that we experienced at Jefferson Street. It's like it is darn near impossible to keep out drugs and alcohol from a homeless gathering.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. I'm going to take a call from JD in Georgia. Good morning, JD.
Good morning. You're doing a great job, Ann. Love your show. Listen all the time. Call in frequently. Anyway, in 2020, I formed a little corporation, a little nonprofit corporation called Humane Society for Humans. Isn't it time we had one? We as a society here in the United States of America, the richest nation in the world, we spend $112 billion a year on our puppies and our kitties. Don't get me wrong, I love animals. Not the point here. How much do you think we spend on the homeless? Less than $10 billion. It's a crying shame that in the richest nation in the world, we spend 10 cents on the dollar on our homeless people across this nation as compared to what we spend on just our own pets. So this is why I formed this corporation. And I couldn't get any single person to give any money towards this cause. But I wanted to do low-cost solar-powered micro-housing with my atmospheric water generator. What better for the homeless people to have their own home with no electric bill and with own drinking water from thin air, never need to buy bottled water. But the point being is giving these people a hand up. The first thing these people need is a place to live, a place they can call home, not a cardboard box. It just irks me to death that we spend all of this much money on our pets, but we don't have the money to help our homeless people.
Good context. Thanks, JD. Good morning. We've got Daryl in St. Augustine. Go ahead, Daryl.
Hey, good morning. We can't get communities to build low-income housing because of the not in my backyard. But somehow people are going to be convinced that building a tent city in somebody's neighborhood is going to be okay, and you're going to have that. There is no way any city or county is going to ever allow that to take place. You can't get zoning for low-income housing. That's the first point. The second point is I'm a little old, about 63. I never saw a homeless person until the mid to late 80s. So what in the heck did we do until mid-80s? Because there was no homeless, and I rode a bicycle all over North Florida and all over Vancouver, British Columbia, and there were no homeless people. So we changed something in the financing, in the insurance, in the banking, in the care. We did something different. And whatever we did different, let's just go change it and go back to the way we did it before.
All right. Thanks for those comments. Appreciate it. The question of, locating something like this, Katie, is difficult. I mean, there is really no place that would be appropriate for maybe a large scale tent city that is run by the city. It would be controversial.
I mean, we've run stories, I can't remember if it was this week or last week, like your caller was saying, about affordable housing coming in and people fighting that because they didn't want it near them. They didn't even want the affordable housing near them, much less if you're going to have kind of a homeless camp near a neighborhood. You bet that neighborhood's probably going to fight it. So there is a point in where do you put this? If this is going to actually be created, where do you put it? But again, I still think the key, like Claire said, is you have to have houses to put people in. That's going to take money to build. So where's the funding to help these people?
We got a call from Charles on the west side. Go ahead, Charles.
Hey, good morning, guys. I've got to say that this is the meanest, most fascist legislature in the entire United States. I just don't see where all this hatred towards targeted groups is coming from. I was born and raised in Germany, and it's just unbelievable. I am embarrassed to be a Floridian sometimes. Thanks a lot for taking my call.
Thanks, Charles. Appreciate it. And that's the end for that topic. Guess what? It's time for now our lightning round. And I'm going to start with you, Ann Maxwell. What are you working on, thinking about, or looking at?
So I'm looking to hopefully do the story today. We did a bunch of stories last year on squatting. There was a woman who had this rental home and two people moved in and said they were scammed and had rented it online through Zillow, but they could never find that guy. And apparently that had happened to another house. And so the state legislature has passed a bill that would ostensibly close that loophole that makes it take a long time to get somebody out of a house if they're there without the owner's permission. It took weeks and had to go through the civil court system. So that has passed, and looking to follow up on that hopefully today.
Great story, Ann. How about you, Claire? What's going on?
I caught a headline this week on First Coast News that I was very interested in. The homeless nonprofit that distributes the Homeless Voice is suing to ban the city from enforcing its panhandling ban under First Amendment grounds. I spoke with the founder of the Homeless Voice years ago when I first saw the people selling those their donation papers around town, and he told me that he had wanted to have a facility in Jacksonville, and city leaders told him flat no.
Wild. Katie Jeffries, what's cooking in your world?
So I cover cold cases at First Coast News. There's going to be a cold case announcement today at 11:30 in Putnam County from a case I believe was the 1980s. A man was found shot and killed, but they didn't know who he was. He was buried in kind of an unknown type grave. They ran DNA. They have identified who he is. They've reached out to his family, who will be at the press conference today, and they have some more information to release. So that should be exciting. That's today at 11:30.
Awesome. We look forward to hearing more about that. Katie, thank you. I'm just going to give a weird shout out to the Matthews Bridge. I drove over it yesterday. Aside from being the scariest bridge in the city, it's also the only one where you can actually see the water when you're driving over it. So if you haven't driven the Matthews Bridge in a while, it is weird. It's asymmetrical, but it's very uniquely Jacksonville. So that's my shout out.
That little grating.
Yeah.
Love that grating.
But does it have a Twitter account?
Not yet. Maybe that's
not as sassy as the Buckman.
Today.
You because you have such an amazing energy about you, and it's interesting because I feel like the persona that you have on stage is different than the one when you're one-on-one with you, because your music is so spiritual. It is led by something that seems to come from deep within, but you have this jovial, playful side as well. So first off, let's talk about your presence here at Winter Jazz Festival. I know you've played a number of them over the years, but celebrating 20 years of the Winter Jazz Festival, what has your experience been this time around? You have a new trio.
Yeah, well, we've been working together for some time now, but usually it's, in the past, it's always been a larger group.
Right.
With like two horns. You have like bass, drums, interviews, especially with the Coltrane, Alice Coltrane, Dorothy Ashby, Alice Coltrane, Dorothy Ashby. And I go, no, I don't get sick of it because, in essence, I guess early on I must have asked for it because I remember we were in Detroit we were playing, this is 2008, we were doing Alice Coltrane's music with Robbie Coltrane, Charlie Hayden, Jack DeJohnette, and Jerry Allen. And I remember being out to dinner with Robbie, and I was like, look, it's like part of my whole life's mission here that like the harp community put some respect on my name, you know what I'm saying? And because it's such a white space, and it's such a classical space, that there's this sort of, when it comes to music that's not classical music, it doesn't get looked at in the same regard.
Right.
And so for me, it was just like a respect thing. So if I can make a part of what I do include them all the time, then like that's what I'm gonna do. So I started to do that early on. The whole set is not them, but I'll open up with an obscure Alice Coltrane tune and you know, do some Ashby tune that I've arranged myself, you know, or not. Sometimes I get fun and let's do it the way she did it. So I don't get sick of it, especially because most of the set are my originals.
Right.
And so that's okay.
Right. Well, Brandy,
I'm sorry.
we want to thank you so much.
there.
We definitely need to do.
That is going to be an amazing show this Thursday, and we're actually giving away 2 tickets right now to the Brandy Younger Show. Email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org with the subject line tickets if you want to win a couple of those seats. You will not want to miss that show. And that's our program. Join us again Monday when we're joined by the Jacksonville attorney who successfully challenged Florida's Stop Woke law. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida